Good morning, everyone. It is a very snowy morning here. Hope you all are keeping warm and safe. Obviously, I did not do my reaction discussion about the Nintendo Direct last night, so I was not over the moon excited about it. But there are always kind of two ways I like to look at these types of events and discuss them. That's one, within the little focused box of what I'm personally interested in, and then outside that box, how good was it? Not just thinking of myself, but thinking about in general, how good was the presentation and what does it say quality wise about what's going to be coming up this year for Nintendo. And those are two very different reactions this time. Usually I'm a little more mixed, but overall, I think talking about the presentation in a more general sense, I think there's a lot of great stuff here. There is some quality content coming out and some really big surprises completely out of left field. And on top of that, I think one thing that people have to keep in mind that I think a lot of people seem to be forgetting looking at a lot of the comments coming up during watching the Nintendo Direct was that these are only the titles being released aside from a couple of announcements like Splatoon for 2022, just kind of a reveal. These are all titles coming out within the next few months. A lot of these were March and April. So this is what we are getting very soon, up through the first half of the year. There's a whole another half a year to consider. So if your game, like a lot of stuff I was looking for, if the game you were looking to see wasn't shown here, it could still be coming as early as the end of this summer. Just because something wasn't here, and we'll talk about that with Zelda later, doesn't mean that it's not coming or that you won't be surprised. This is just one little piece of the puzzle, and I'm very happy that they're in a situation now where these big directs can happen in just a few months. Later from now, we'll get another one talking about coming out what's coming later in the year. So as far as just showing this is what's coming in the immediate future for the Nintendo Switch, there's a lot of really good stuff coming very, very quickly. I think it speaks to what's going to be another huge year for Nintendo, because already there's good content coming, and then there's so much that hasn't been announced, a whole another half a year worth of stuff. And I think the second half of the year, I think the back end of the year, especially getting into fall, into right before Christmas time, is really going to be where the biggest of the big stuff falls. I think that the springtime and early summer is going to be a lot of catch up with things that are maybe a little delayed, smaller projects, a lot of third-party stuff that is also on PS4, that kind of thing. I think a lot of the bigger stuff is going to drop later in the year. But just going through the Direct, talking about some of the things that stood out to me, obviously not talking about everything. We'll skip talking about the beginning, because that intro gets into talking about my personal box. But the next thing that stood out to me was the Famicom Detective Club games, which that is just, I am shocked. And those are games I looked at many years ago as a curiosity that never left Japan, and I was always kind of interested and never, took the dive to look into them much more deeply or play any of them. That's pretty cool. I'm fairly interested. We'll see, how they turn out, but I might end up getting that. Two, stories in one here. That's not a series that ever really left Japan, and it just does not have recognition outside Japan, so it's kind of cool that that's coming and very surprising. Samurai Warriors 5 I think looks like a lot of fun and falls into that category of so many games where if I had infinite amount of time, that's a game I would play just for fun. But I probably won't end up getting it just because there's so many other games to play. Same thing with something like Monster Hunter Rise. Looks great. Not really a Monster Hunter person though, but if I was, I'd be very excited because it looks awesome. One thing that came fairly early on, and there are a couple of releases, I think Square Enix as a publisher really was shining in this Direct. The big one that stood out to me, because I consider PS1 era Square in the 90s in general, Super Nintendo and PS1, to be not only the peak of that company, but one of the greatest years of releases from a single company ever. So to see Legend of Mana come to the Switch, I'm very excited. I will be absolutely grabbing that. That's the only thing in here that is a 100% I am buying that I saw in this Direct. So that I'm very excited for. The new Mario Golf looks like a fun multiplayer game, the kind of thing that if someone, a friend had it, I might play it over at their house. Wouldn't be something we would pick up, but it definitely looks fun. And Stubbs, the zombie, I can't believe, like, there's some weird things here, like the Famicom Detective Club, that I never, ever would have guessed would be showing up. And that is not a game I thought was going to ever have a second chance of life, ironically. But yeah, that's kind of interesting and bizarre that's coming out, but it's really, really cool. And another one that stands out is Project Triangle Strategy, which is a horrible name, and they said working title at the end, so I'm hoping that changes because it's terrible. But it looks like Final Fantasy Tactics, the first one on PS1. It reminds me of that a lot, with also this intricate choice system, which will give you a lot of replay value. So that's the one to keep an eye on. Another one that was a big surprise, which is also coming to PS4, is the Ninja Gaiden Master Collection. That was a pretty big surprise. I didn't see that coming, and if that was coming out, that's the kind of thing I would expect to be more Xbox, PlayStation. Wouldn't necessarily assume a Switch release would happen. And here it's being shown off, and that's really cool. It looks fantastic. That's a series that I think has kind of slipped away over time. So it's really cool to see that. And I wonder if this is something that sells well. Maybe a fourth one will come out. I wonder if this is sort of a testing the waters kind of thing to see if it's still popular. Then, of course, getting into the end, the last couple things here. Zelda, I know a lot of people are very disappointed because there were high expectations with the anniversary and everything. But again, as I was saying earlier, I think that's something that is upcoming. Just because, I mean, this is just the middle of February, only the second month of the year. Just because stuff wasn't shown off here, I think there's actually going to be a Zelda-focused Direct eventually. I think there's going to be some stuff shown off at a later date, and then when we get closer to more things releasing, I think there's going to be a Zelda Direct, which shows a bunch of the Breath of the Wild sequel with a release date and all that. I think it's going to be a huge focus. I think it's going to be a Zelda-focused Direct, and I think more Zelda titles will be coming to the Switch before the end of this year. I think it's just ramping up. I think this was just, here's what's coming out very quickly in the next few months for the Switch. It wasn't necessarily this is our plan for the year. These are all our big reveals. There's still a lot of cards I think they're holding, and I think one of those, the big Zelda Direct, Skyward Sword, coming out, I think is just the first step. I would be shocked if the other two, Twilight Princess and Wind Waker, the Wii U versions, HD releases, didn't get moved over this year. Sadly for Zelda fans, again, I'm not a big fan of the franchise, but for Zelda fans, I feel a little bad that they're probably going to release individually as well. It's probably going to be one of those years where if you wanted to get all the Zelda releases, you have to spend like $300 between now and the end of the year, not including themed hardware like Joy-Cons and things like that. I think they're really going to milk it by releasing them individually. I definitely think that's what they're going to be doing coming forward, but just because they weren't here, I do think they will be released and revealed at a later date. So I think much more Zelda is to come. I think people are kind of jumping the gun here with being disappointed and saying they are going to botch the whole anniversary idea. It's only February, plenty of time. And the last big thing was Splatoon 3. That was their one big, just announcing it, this is way in the future, next year, coming out Splatoon 3. For me, it depends on what they do with it, because I haven't enjoyed Splatoon on the Wii U. I enjoy Splatoon 2 on the Switch. That was actually one of the first two games I got on the Switch, and I really enjoyed that. My thing with Splatoon is that I don't play online multiplayer for anything, ever. I never have, and I have zero interest, and that's been a huge focus, rightly so, for Splatoon 2. I mean, that's really where it has been shining and taking off. But as far as being able to play local co-op, things have always been very restricted, and you have to have multiple systems and copies of the game and things like that. In the original Splatoon, you could just do kind of the balloon pop thing, whatever. Not really much of anything. And as far as single player, I really have enjoyed the campaigns, and it's a lot of fun, but it's a very limited amount of fun. Like, you can play it through, and you're just kind of done. So for me, it depends on what they do with it. If it still is very, very focused on the online component, and there's not a lot there for local co-op experience, and there's not a lot there with the single player experience, which I'd love to see expanded a bit more into a little bit more of a Mario-esque style, like a larger, more intricate single player campaign. If they do those things, I'd be interested, but otherwise, I don't know. I probably would just stick with Splatoon 1 and 2. So that really is, I think, as a whole, I think, again, a lot of great stuff was shown, some big surprises, and I think that it was a very good direct because, yet again, it's really, aside from Splatoon, showing what's coming out in the immediate future. So I think giving it, sort of a low grade because they didn't show everything, all the big releases coming out the whole year. That's not really what this was. This was just getting the ball rolling. I think whatever the next one is, maybe around E3, is going to be huge and is going to drop a lot of big name titles. And there are a few things coming out in the future that we didn't see. Little smaller releases like Nocturne, Shin Megami Tensei 5, I think is going to have a bigger showing a little bit later in the year. We'll see what goes on. I think this was a very good direct, though. I think it was very strong, and I think it really is going to be a big, strong start for the year, for what I think is going to be a very strong year in the second half for Nintendo. And rolling back here to the intro, talking a little bit about my more personal interest, as I mentioned a bit as I was going on some of these games, but again, they're just. While I think it was, thinking outside my own interest, a very strong direct, there really wasn't much of anything for me that I personally was super interested in. I'm curious about Famicom Detective Club, maybe Splatoon 3, a year and a half from now. So those are, two maybes. Legend of Mana I definitely want to get unless they really screw it up somehow, which I seriously doubt, or if it ends up being digital only. I haven't looked yet to see if there's a physical release, cover image or anything. I haven't checked that out yet as of the time of recording this, so that's again a probable, Legend of Mana. And aside from that, that's just re-release of a PS1 game. Interesting. I'm excited for it if it's a good quality physical release, but nothing super great. So it wasn't a lot for me here. But the big disappointment, and it kind of put me in a sour mood throughout the whole presentation, was the opening. Because if you watch my channel, the number one thing I was looking for, aside from some other select titles, the number one thing I was looking for was something, some reveal, some hint as to what is coming up next from Monolith Soft, whether that is Xenoblade related or not, because we know there's another game they've been working on and we know basically nothing about. And the big thing that I was hoping would be soon would be Xenoblade Chronicles X being ported from the Wii U, and I think every year that goes by, the chances of that happening become a little bit less and kind of slip away, so it's very disheartening not to see that. And, I'd love to see what is coming up next for Xenoblade, even if it's, 2022, 2023, here's a hint kind of thing, but it probably wasn't going to be the big thing here, and yet the opening, the opening, I was so incredibly excited. It's like, holy cow. Is there going to be more story content for Xenoblade Chronicles 2? Is there going to be a spin-off? Is Xenoblade Chronicles 3 going to start from a continuation of Xenoblade Chronicles 2? Are they going to go that route with the next one? I was just super into it, and it was, moving into its own. Pyro's missing. What's happening? Is this going to be the launching point for a new story? And it's just Pyro and Mythra and Smash. And that, I can't explain how just disheartening that was to really be amped up and be like, oh my gosh, the number one thing that I want to see from this Nintendo Direct they're opening with, I was so into it, and then it's like, okay. Which is cool. It's nice they're in there. The stage looks cool. It looks like they're doing a great job with it. It's just, I being so convinced for a couple of seconds that it's going to be, holy cow, this is going to be the greatest direct ever, to, she's in Smash. And because I don't really care about Smash. I've never liked Smash. We'll probably end up buying this iteration of Smash Bros. Eventually to play together, but, just haven't, gone ahead and pulled the trigger on that one. So that opening just really soured my mood, and I was like, man. And then just to go through each title and be like, that's interesting, that's curious, and wow, that's cool, I'm glad for that audience or this audience, or I'm surprised that's coming out. But there was nothing just purely talking about my personal taste in games. There was just about nothing for me here. A couple curiosities, and a PS1 game that I had played many years ago that I'll probably rebuy on Switch. That was about it. So, personally, it was very disappointing, but I don't think the actual direct was bad. I think it was actually very strong. That's just the difference between what I like versus what I think it's showing. And again, I think that there's going to be a lot more shown in the future, and hopefully that's the same thing with stuff with Monolith Soft. Maybe, E3 they do show the next big thing. It just isn't ready to show yet, and it's more of a second half of this year title or next year. So again, yeah, I think it was a strong direct. I think that there's just a lot of personal disappointment with people wanting, things like Metroid Prime 4, Metroid Collection, all the different stuff, showing all the Zelda stuff. I think it's just not quite time for any of that stuff yet. I think it was a very focused direct on a very short span of time. And I think, keep positive attitude and look what's coming forward through the year. I think there's going to be still a whole lot of huge surprises left after we get past these first few months of the year. So everybody, thank you for stopping by and sticking with me and hearing what I think about this direct. I'd love to hear what you thought of it down below. Whether you're disappointed or excited or whatever thoughts you have, let me know down below. And again, stay warm, stay safe, and have a great weekend coming up here.